I want to begin with you, Mr. Freeman. Of course, in your professional career, you've seen these kind of debates over and over and over again. Is this time going to be different from the previous times?
It might be. I think what we've got in President Trump and some of his trade advisors, we've got a group of people that really doesn't value the WTO and the international trade regime as much as predecessors may have. And indeed, you have open calls for a return to sort of the more unilateral efforts of the era before WTO, using things like 301. So it could very well be different.
Mr. Zhang, what does China make of the use of 301? Some suggest this is already a very old kind of way of thinking about international trade and also thinking about the future of bilateral relations.
Oh yes, you know that as an expert in this field, I feel amazing on that because in the past decades, before 1990s, U.S. did use this type of measures, but since the WTO established, U.S. was rare to do like this. But I'm afraid that this special Section 301, which is will focusing on intellectual property issues, as well as IP, market access issues. In case they used this type of domestic laws, that maybe there will be contradiction between their domestic law and international law. So how to explain it and how to operate it? So I'm afraid that the U.S. will get into trouble on that.
Well, Mr. Zhang, probably you're already one step ahead than some of the advisors for President Trump in that regard. Let's go to Mr. Freeman to help us understand, what's next? If U.S. take another step, try to punish China on that, it's likely to violate some of the rules of the international trade mechanism. And then how will the U.S. still remain in that mechanism and do business with others, even with China on different issues?
Well, I think the Trump administration is trying to be a little strategic in this, and they're using a section of the 301 law that allows the United States to take unilateral action if there is an issue not covered by the WTO. And in this case, the theory would be that the forced technology transfer through intellectual property rights co-option or something of that sort is not covered by WTO, and therefore this would not be an illegal unilateral action. I think that's easily challenged, and I also know that there are possibilities that China could take unilateral action of its own in retaliation, and that could put us down the path of a very difficult trade skirmish, if not all-out war.
Okay. Mr. Zhang, let's go to the root of this. Is there or are there many cases of so-called forced intellectual property transfer from outside China to China demanded by China? Mr. Zhang.
I think that nowadays between China has been a big player in international markets. Also, IP enter China and China's IP go to other countries already very frequent. So in this regard, I think that technology transfer and IP deals often happen many times. In this regard, especially today, we are at age of globalization. Actually, every country needs to cooperate with other countries. That means we need to have more and more frequent, IP deals, trade deal with other economy. So meanwhile, also we need to cooperate together.
Mr. Freeman, agree or not?
No, I think that's generally right. I think the problem is that while at this point I don't think anybody in the United States government doubts the sincerity of the Ministry of Commerce or others in the Chinese government that value and support the protection of intellectual property. The reality is that intellectual property theft and co-option is continued in a pretty dramatic scale in China, and how you deal with that is a subject that both Chinese and U.S. negotiators are really tearing their hair out and have been for years. This may not be the preferred route for anyone. To go a unilateral direction of taking on the Chinese, but Chinese on this side. But you know, that it is born out of a little frustration, and I think that's understandable.
Is China taking any actions, really functional actions against the IPR theft and also cooperation?
I think that in China, you know that China's market economy only have 4 decades, so very young markets. In that progress, from Chinese side, gradually we have formulated our rules and regulations on IPR. Also, every year, you know, China's State Bureau of IPR did a lot and in order to protect IP. Especially, I emphasize on one sentence that is, given that China need to have our innovation-oriented economy, that means by ourselves we have to, you know, protect IPR.
I see. Mr. Freeman, you are a frequenter to China. So is what Mr. Zhang from China just described part of the pictures you saw?
Of course, and I think you've seen dramatic improvements in both protection and enforcement of intellectual property in China over the past 4 decades. There's no doubt. I mean, it used to be you'd talk about intellectual property with Chinese entrepreneurs, and they'd say, why should we not use Microsoft Windows for free when the rest of the world has used gunpowder, you know, paper and other things that the Chinese China came up with and never received licensing fees or royalties for. I think that's changed a lot over the years. But the reality continues to be that intellectual property theft is still a major issue in China, and you know, although one recognizes that this is only a 4-decade-old experiment in the development of the Chinese economy since the mid-70s, you also have China has become the world's largest trading economy, probably, and
right.
It will certainly be the largest economy pretty soon. So it may not be enough of an excuse to say we're still new at this when you're the biggest player in the field.
You're not new anymore, Mr. Zhang, according to Mr. Freeman. Meanwhile, you know, China, Made in China 2025, China considered it as a very important way of making its own manufacturing to be global. However, others consider it, at least some of them, see China as trying to be on its own. Mr. Zhang, what do you make of all of these, you know, reactions from the others, and also assessment, whether true or not, from the others?
I think that Made in 2025 will not only for China itself, but also for global markets.
Explain.
Yeah. You know, today China is the 2nd biggest economy in the world, the biggest manufacturing center in the world, the biggest traders in the world. So that means China's manufacturing sectors belonging to all over the world. In that progress, actually, you know, every year China exported so a lot of products, and we provided our affordable products for those developing countries. Also, developed countries, they can benefit from Made in China. In the future, in case we can have our, you know, technology, high value added products,
right,
qualified products, and then, you know, every country can benefit from that. Of course, for China, in the future, gradually, we will be moving on, you know, media end at high end of manufacturing sectors, and some of, you know, low end manufacturing chains may be gradually moving to other, you know, poor countries and least developing countries.
All right. There's another question I should also ask you, Mr. Freeman, because we asked the Chinese guests, quite a number of them, for him to fight back, but for you as well. I mean, the United States tried to exercise Section 301, of course, with the name of intellectual property rights protection. But the link that the US policymakers these days are trying to make between politics, geopolitics, and trade, and also the use of seldomly exercised sections of international law, which has been outdated in a way. What would that mean eventually for the US soft power, if I could use that very abstract and big word? And what would that mean for the US reputation when it comes to international trade? And how will the US react really if China take retaliatory actions after the US took something China wouldn't accept?
That's a profound question, Tianwen. I think it's hard to answer. The reality is that soft power comes out of other countries looking at the United States and seeing something they'd like to emulate. And when the United States quite officially goes forth and says, we are just about making America great again and to heck with everybody else, that's hard to preserve good feelings and soft power when that's a primary focus of your administration, whether it's in trade or other international affairs. So I do think this is not something the United States can do blithely, and I do think that this might actually make China in its efforts to develop its own soft power with other countries look better. So I'm not sure that this gets us to a place that even Mr. Trump would agree is making America great again.
I see. Before we go, 30 seconds left for you, Mr. Zhang. What can China do now?
Firstly, I think that we have to convince the U.S. to understand, trade surplus issues. Secondly, also we need to have more dialogue with the
Good
US.
luck with that, Mr. Zhang.
Yeah.
Mr. Freeman participated in many of those sessions. Anyway, and then secondly, you said?
Yeah, secondly, we have to promote dialogue and even if negotiations. Third one, from Chinese side, we will take positive measures to import more and more products made in the US.
And in other countries as well.
Yeah.